relationships with those we care about the most. As you complete loving, you and the people that you love can begin to build joy and brain skills and bonds together. And if the people you love are in too much crisis, there's a special thriving crisis unit to help them stabilize so that they can begin to build joy with you. You and the people you love and your entire community can be thriving. For handouts or more information about thriving, visit our website at www.thrivingrecovery.org. In thriving, you and I are building joyful bonds together. And for that reason, we want to practice all our joy-building exercises in groups of 3 to 5 people. This will keep you safe as your life is restarting. Welcome to Restarting. I am glad that you're here with me. For some of you, this will be the first time that you've ever explored what recovery really means. And for others of you, you want your recovery to restart. You want it to really thrive. And you'll find that here. Some of you are here because you have been working on issues related to addiction, to substances like alcohol or drugs. And others of you are here because you are in a relationship with somebody whose addiction is driving you crazy. And you'll find the support and the help you need to change. And others of you are here because you've been working on painful life issues for a long time. And you want your life to really change from the inside out. You want your life to be different. You want it to be full of joy. Well, you have come to the right place. This is the place. You already know that I met Corey, but there's some things about me that I want to tell you about before we start our journey together. It's been 28 years since I started in healing ministry, working with people in recovery from addiction and from painful life trauma. What you need to know about me is this. I am a person in recovery from both addiction and trauma. The second thing you should know is that over the years, I've worked with all different kinds of phases of treatment, from outpatient counseling at churches to rehab programs, both Christian and secular, jail programs, programs for homeless people. But what really is important is this. I know what it's like to have a family that's devastated because of addiction and trauma. And that leads to places like rehab, jail, prison, and funerals. The third thing you should know is that over the years, I've helped develop programs and write curriculum and help found programs. I've really tried to do my best to provide excellent care. But you know what really breaks my heart? Sitting down with a new family who's just coming for help or treatment for the first time, and knowing that traditional addiction treatment models offer only a 20% chance of success. And that is just not good enough. The last thing you should know is that I've helped train people to work in addiction ministry for a long time. In fact, over the last couple of years, I've helped train people from over 30 countries to minister to those who are hurting. But a couple of years ago, something really radical happened. And it changed my life. And it changed my life so much, we had to call this thing something. So we called it Thriving, Recover Your Life. Thriving is what we're going to be doing for the next 12 weeks together. You're going to find out all about how your brain will change with joy. Come on, let's go find a place to sit down and start our first lesson. And this first lesson is going to be fun because it's called How is the Brain Organized and What Does It Need? Before we start this week's lesson, let me introduce you to my friend, Dr. Jim Wilder, with this week's 3-dimensional living brain moment.
Recent developments in computer imaging and brain scans have allowed us to do something we've never done before. That is, study the inside of a working living brain in 3 dimensions. By doing that, we've been able to discover which parts of the brain are on and which parts of the brain are off during significant processes. If you look at this brain scan, for instance, looking at it from underneath, a normal brain would be nice and smooth and full. But the brain you're looking at here in this scan has been using marijuana. You have two holes where you ought to have brain activity, right about the front and the top. Looking at the brain from the top, you find that a normal brain would be nice and full and smooth like this, but this brain with methamphetamines is full of holes, just like this one with cocaine, or the alcohol brain. And if you look at the heroin brain, you notice that it is full of holes and gullies, because drugs are not good for your brain. For more information on this, we recommend that you go and see the Brain Plates by Dr. Daniel Amen, who's graciously allowed us to use these slides for your education. Now for spiritual training, practical application, and the future of recovery, here's Ed.
Thank you, Jim. Now you're probably wondering, why are we talking about the brain in the beginning of a thriving recovery program? It's a good question. We're talking about the brain because thriving is based on cutting-edge research from Decade of the Brain. It means that we're solution-centered. And in thriving, we're going to be understanding how our brain works so we can apply solutions to help our brain heal. The first thing you have to know about this process is that God created our brain. The Bible says this: "Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. And then God saw everything he'd made, and indeed, it was very good." The important thing about this is God says, let us. It means that God is relational. It means that when he made us in his image, he made you and me to be relational people too. And another really neat thing about this passage of Scripture is it says God saw everything and saw that it was very good. And that includes you, and that includes me. We function best according to our original design when we're in relationship with God and each other, when that relationship is joyful. We're designed so that our brain functions best when it's in secure relationships. David said this: "I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works." And you know what? You and me are part of those works. David goes on to say, "And that my soul knows very well." Now our brain is created with two hemispheres. And those hemispheres are different, but they're designed so that they work together. The brain works best when each side is healthy and the two sides are synchronized. Now, let's learn a little bit about the brain. Take your left hand and put it on the left side of your head. Now, under there is the left hemisphere of your brain. And you can find the other side the same way. Take your right hand, put it on the right-hand side of your head, and under there is the right hemisphere of your brain. Now, it's important to understand the difference because they work differently. I want you to think about the left side of your brain as like a big file cabinet. And it knows things because it can name them. Think about this. Everything that you've heard that's a word, that you've read, all the data that's been stored is filed under a big file cabinet. If I say the word bark, as in bark from trees, everything you know about tree bark is filed under the B drawer, under the ARK category. And you can recall everything you know that you've read or heard in words about bark on trees. Now the right side of my brain is different. It knows things because it's experienced them. By touching this piece of bark, the right side of my brain knows that it's rough, that it's not smooth. It knows it's splintery. It knows it's thin. It knows it's flexible. It's knowing this because I'm experiencing it. I'm looking at it. I'm touching it. Now, these two hemispheres of my brain are designed to work together so that what I know in my file cabinet about bark matches what I know from the right side of my brain about experience. Let's look a little bit more at the difference between these two sides of my brain. Now, the left hemisphere of the brain is dominant for words and for language. It's a place of stories, a place of descriptions. It's where we come up with explanations. It's where we do logic and reasoning. It's the part of our brain that wants to know what 2 plus 2 is. What's the capital of South Dakota? And how high are the mountains? It is very, very resistant to change. In fact, once it makes up its mind, it will hold on to what it believes to be true in the face of all kinds of contrary evidence. Have you ever wondered why an alcoholic who's lost his family, who's lost his job, who's lost his car, who's lost his house, still refuses to admit that he's an alcoholic? It's because the left side of his brain has decided he can't be an alcoholic. The only time he can change his mind is when the right hemisphere of his brain gets upset enough. When he's having enough crisis and enough pain, his left brain may be open to change its opinion. Now the right side of the brain is different because it's primarily nonverbal. It thinks in images, it thinks in pictures, it thinks about voice tone. It has executive control of the entire brain, and it contains a 4-level control center that we're going to talk about in a minute that's really important. It is dominant for emotions and for body. It synchronizes and it notices everything. And the right brain is important because it's the part of your brain that helps your left brain change its mind. Now, on the right side of the brain, there's an incredible 4-level control center. And we're going to talk about each one of these levels. Level 1 is where we have attachment. This is the thalamus and the basal ganglia. And these are important because they help us regulate dopamine. And if you know anything about addiction, you know that dopamine is the neurotransmitter that helps us feel pleasure. Addiction is all about dopamine. Level 1 is really important because it's set in relationship with other people. When level 1 is healthy, we move on to level 2, which is the amygdala. The amygdala is important because it helps us regulate adrenaline. The amygdala is pretty simple. It only has 3 opinions about everything. Either things are good, things are bad, or things are scary. Now, if level 1 is set correctly, life will be pretty good. We'll feel a normal amount of pleasure, and the amygdala is going to say to itself, life's pretty good. But if level 1 is not set well, if we don't feel a lot of pleasure, the amygdala is going to decide that life's pretty bad and pretty scary. And that means we'll have a lot of adrenaline floating through our system. Level 3 is the cingulate cortex. This is important because it's the part of our brain that helps us do negative emotions. The cingulate also helps us regulate serotonin. Level 4 is the right orbital-prefrontal cortex, and that's a mouthful. But all it means is it's the part of your brain that's directly behind your right eye. And this is an important part of my brain because it's where I know what it's like to be Ed. It's my brain's identity center. It helps me know what it's like to be me. It helps you know what it's like to be you. It helps us focus our attention over time. Now together, this 4-level control center is designed to have executive control over our entire brain for our entire life. And a really amazing thing about how God designed this is that relationships are the building block for the entire brain. The right brain's emotional control center starts developing from birth. And level 1, attachment, is the foundation for everything going on in this part of the brain. A healthy control center allows the right brain and the later developing left brain to make smooth and solid and healthy connections between the two. Relationships are the foundation for everything, for health, for integration, and for building joy. This information about the control center in the right hemisphere of the brain comes from the work of Dr. Alan Shore, who's done 3 groundbreaking books. The first is Affect Regulation and Origin of the Self. The second is Affect Regulation and Repair of the Self. And my personal favorite, Affect Dysregulation and Disorders of the Self. All this means is that for healthy development, the brain needs joyful relationships. Isn't this an incredible place to sit down and talk about joy? What does joy mean to the brain? To the brain, joy means relationship. Joy means that we are glad to be together, that you and me are glad when we're together. It means that someone is glad to be with me, that someone's glad to be with you. Now, how do we build joy together? If we build it non-verbally, how does that happen? Let's suppose that I'm seeing you and I'm glad to be with you. As soon as I see you and I'm glad to be with you, there's dopamine released through my right brain. It notifies the left side of my face that something amazing is happening. And I smile. When I smile, your left retinas pick it up and your right brain interprets it and it says, Ed is glad to be with me. And as soon as that happens, there's dopamine released in your brain. It notifies the left side of your face something good's going on. You smile, my left retinas pick it up, and my right brain goes, yes, they're glad to be with me, I knew it. And I do more dopamine, and the process repeats back and forth. Do you know how fast this takes place? My brain can know if you're glad to be with me in 40 milliseconds. That's faster than I can put words together. You and I share a cycle of back and forth being glad to be together 6 times a second. That is incredibly fast. Our brain chemistry actually synchronizes. We match. The dopamine in my brain is matched by dopamine in your brain, and back and forth we go. In fact, we have our own private dopamine party, just the two of us, without saying a word. Our brains match structure, match growth. This is authentic, it's truthful, and it's very rapid communication. And each cycle, our emotions amplify. I'm more excited, you're more excited, then I'm even more and more and more, and back and forth we go. This happens so fast that it feels like you're making me feel happy, you're making me feel good, you're making me feel joyful. Our task for our first year of life is to live and experience ever-increasing levels of joy. In fact, we're designed so that in this first year of life, we build joy and more and more and more and more. When we do that, we're able to handle increasingly difficult levels and intensity of problems without being overwhelmed. But when our joy capacity is low, we're overwhelmed. Life is painful. What ends up happening is our joy capacity is here, but our pain level's here. And that gap is experienced by our brain as trauma. The deepest level of pain that you and I can experience is attachment pain at level 1 of our control center. Because then we don't know who we belong to, or what's personal to us, or if there's anybody that even cares. When we live in that kind of pain, we have a tendency to do something that gets us in a lot of trouble. We medicate to regulate the emotions and the pain that we just can't handle. 47% of all relapse is due to either positive emotions that overwhelm us or negative emotions that overwhelm us. So how do we medicate to regulate? Let me introduce you to a really important thriving concept, and that's beeps. Because when we medicate to regulate, we use beeps. And beeps are attachments to behaviors, events, experiences, people, and substances that we use to regulate emotions, increase pleasure, or decrease pain. Attachments to beeps are amazing because they help us medicate or artificially regulate emotions that we just can't handle, increase our pleasure and decrease our pain. And the thing about beeps is that they take the place of secure attachments to God and other people. The very places we could go to build joy are the things that beeps exclude from our lives. There are an incredible variety of beeps. There's everything from sex to partying to codependency to cocaine or drugs. There's performance or perfectionism. There's alcohol. There's the computer or internet pornography. There's workaholism. There's money, which is about power and control. There's thrill-seeking behavior. There's gambling. There's control. And one of my very personal favorites, ice cream. There are an infinite variety of flavors of ice cream that can be used as beeps. Since the 1930s, self-help support groups and the 12 steps have helped millions and millions of men and women around the world find sobriety. But thriving, through advances made in research from the Decade of the Brain, is a program that's designed to help participants become healthy, whole, sober, and mature. Thriving teaches participants the joy and relationship-building skills that the brain needs to heal and remain sober. How do we do this? We do it through the development of secure, healthy attachments with God and others in a mature and life-giving community. See, the problem with beeps is that beeps always promise relief, but they make our lives unmanageable. Step 1 of the 12 steps says this: we admitted we were powerless over alcohol or drugs or beeps, and that our lives had become unmanageable. Our lives become unmanageable because our attachments to beeps are totally below a level of consciousness. Beeps affect the attachment center of the brain. Remember, that's level 1 of the control center. The brain is designed so that dopamine and endogenous opiates, or endorphins, are released when people are glad to be with us. And this is the neurochemistry of joy. But beeps fool the attachment center. They're clever, they're smart, they're powerful, they're baffling, they're cunning. Beeps also trigger the release of dopamine and stimulate the pleasure center of the brain. They mimic genuine, joyful relationships. And in this way, the attachment center is fooled into attaching to beeps to regulate emotions, pleasure, and pain. They literally hijack the attachment center of my right brain. The attachment center learns to rely on beeps and not healthy attachments with God and others that would produce genuine joy. Beeps literally hijack the attachment center. The attachment center learns to rely on beeps and not relationships with God and others that would produce genuine joy. In this way, beeps fool and hijack the attachment center of the brain. And when beeps take over, they grab the cockpit and they take us to places that we never wanted to go. They make our lives entirely unmanageable, and we're powerless. We go where they take us. So recovering our life means becoming connected in joyful relationships with God and others that produce genuine joy and help our brains heal. And that's why you and me, we need joy and relationships. And you remember from our lesson that attachment pain is the deepest